Or Caroline.
Joyce. Is he?
Sorry. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we have a special treat, a panel discussion on parenting. Now, parents to a large degree all have one thing in common, one goal. We want our children to have happy childhoods and to grow up to be happy, healthy, and independent. One goal, yet there are so many different parenting styles. An Australian specialist in parenting, Dr. Justin Colden, talks about 10 different parenting styles, from the helicopter parent, to the strict parent, to the French parent, the tiger parent, and many others. But what is driving all of these different parenting styles? Is it perhaps the way that we are brought up? Do we take this forward and either parent the same way or don't parent that way at all? Is it perhaps our cultural background? How our culture, whether we're Portuguese or whether we are Chinese or Australian, does that have an influence on our parenting style? Or perhaps, is it at the generation that we are from? Baby boomers. They had a good lifestyle. They did really well. Did that influence the way they parented? Millennials. They were brought up with the internet and social media. How did that influence the way that they think of parenting? And then Generation X, that's when internet first came about, and video games, and also AIDS. How did that influence the way they parent? Today I want to introduce you to 4 panelists, 4 experts in a way in their field. Diverse, each one of them. And they're going to help us unpack and answer some of those questions through their experiences, sharing their ideas. So I want to introduce you, first of all, to Caroline. Caroline is a Gen X woman. Her cultural background is Armenian. She was brought up in Australia. She has 2 children, young children, an 8-year-old and a 13-year-old. Welcome, Caroline. Next we have Molly. Molly is a millennial woman. She's young, she has no children. She was brought up in China, first by her grandmother, her first 10 years, and then by her parents in China. Welcome, Molly. Next we have Simon. Simon is a millennial man. His cultural background is English and Chinese. He was born in Australia and was brought up in Australia. He has no children of his own. Welcome, Simon. And last of our experts, we have Paul. Paul is a Gen X, from Gen X generation. He is a Portuguese, his cultural background is Portuguese, and he was brought up in South Africa. He has 2 adult children, a 25-year-old and a 22-year-old. Welcome, Paul. Now, to guide the discussion, I will pose a number of questions. And to the audience, what I ask is, if you do have questions, please just hold back. I will allow some time at the end of the panel discussion for any questions from the floor. So let's just start and have some fun. I'll start with the first question. Molly, and feel free for other panelists to contribute to the discussion as you feel. Tell us a little bit about how you were brought up. what was the parenting style?
I have two stages of parenting. So in the first 10 years, as Clare introduced, I used to be give away to my grandparents completely for the first 10 years. And it's basically, I was brought up first 6 years with my mom's parents, and then later on moved to my dad's parents in another city. So the first 6 years I live in a small village, and the neighbors know each other very well. And then in a small town, I live in the primary school with my dad's parents. So I have a lot of free time. They kind of like spoiling me as well, you know, from the grandparents. So it's more like I'm a free-ranged kid. But afterwards, I moved to live with my own parents. I think their parenting style is more strict and disciplined because they want the best of me and trying to make me to behave and to achieve a very good results in the school as well. And yes, they're very strict on what I'm doing and have a lot of, you know, to discipline me to do a lot of things in the daily life. Yeah, I think my parent style is typically strict and disciplined parenting style.
Thank you, Molly. Simon, do you want to share what your parenting, or how you were brought up?
So, similar to Molly's situation, there was different stages, and it's a big mix. So, growing up, my father's English and Welsh, and my mother's from Shanghai in China. So, there's already a contrast of cultural influences there, as well as being born in Australia, which is another place altogether. And on top of that, we've moved around, we've lived in many different places within Australia and different ages where my siblings and I were, so different stages allowed for different styles to become more prominent. But as a vague sort of overview, it's elements, I would say, of the strict style, the tiger style, the helicopter, with bits of routine and some free range in there as well. So it's really a bit of
like
everything.
A real mixed bag of a child.
A big old omelette.
Caroline, do you want to share how you were brought up?
Yes. Okay. So I was brought up, you know, the 80s, the 90s. My parents, obviously I'm first generation Australian Armenian. They were extremely strict, very, very controlling. My father is still controlling to this day. Still treats me like I'm 5. No joke, and dead serious. To be honest, if I'm being really honest, my mum was excellent at guilt trips. Education was number one. So everything was about being, you know, my father would always say, you know, he has a PhD in electrical engineering, so education was everything, had to work hard, had to be successful, you know, with exam results, with doing well, you know, going to university, all that sort of stuff. So there was a lot of pressure put on, I guess, us as kids, that they expected a lot from us. And yeah, they were just very, as I said, extremely strict, couldn't go out, couldn't really go anywhere, could not have a boyfriend, none of that stuff. Until I think I was like 18, 19, and I just was like, I rebelled. I just went, I'm not doing this anymore, and I just did what I wanted. But yeah.
Thanks, Caroline. It sounded like it was quite restrictive.
Very
strict. Paul, tell us about your background.
I'd like to start off by saying I relate very much to your story. Now, for different reasons, and again, I don't know if it's because my parents were immigrants to a different country, and therefore they thought that they had to protect their children growing up. Up until the age of 6, I could not speak a word of English. So I was really model coddled and sort of protected. And then once I went to school, education became all-consuming.
Yeah, same.
But for different reasons. My parents didn't finish their schooling, so it was important for me to do well in schooling, to achieve something that they never achieved themselves. So therefore, all their aspirations, all their life dreams were then put onto me, so that it became my responsibility to fulfill their dreams. And I think that is that became sort of a controlling factor around the way that I was brought up. Up until a certain age, where of course you break the mold and they can no longer control you. Right?
It's true.
But I must say, to contrast that, a younger sibling, 3 years younger, they had no control over it. Right? And I would say to myself, hang on a second, I went through all those trials and tribulations. What about him? Why are we
Same deal
different?
with my sister. We paved the way.
That sounds like that's actually another factor that I hadn't even considered,
Yeah.
which is where you are
It's true.
in the family, right? Whether you're the first one or, in fact, the last one. And it seems like you do pave the way. And is that perhaps as a result of fear or unknown from the parents, right? Now, I want to ask another question, which is related, I guess, is based on how, given how you grew up, what have you taken in terms of those that have children forward in your own parenting styles, and which ones have you not at all? And then I would also like Simon and Molly to contribute. I know you don't have children, but if you start thinking forward, what is it that you think you would take forward and not at all?
So if I may start
Go
off,
ahead.
because I've got something to say on this subject.
So do I.
Now, it's not just for my children, it's no longer just my decision or my parenting style that I need to consider, because all of a sudden I've got a partner that's got just as much to say, sometimes even more so, but that's a different story. The reality is that my children are a product of two different upbringing styles. My wife was brought up in a totally different style to myself, so she had her own sort of ideas and ideologies that she would then brought forward. And I think what happened is that there was a conflict right at the start in terms of, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. One thing that I think we shared in common is that we did not want to limit the decision making of our children to something that would beholden her to our own aspirations. She had to grow up herself and create that own journey for herself. And the one thing we didn't want to do, so sometimes it's very difficult, is try to live our lives through our children. And I think that's one of the decisions that we made, or maybe this doesn't answer the question directly, that's one of the things that we did not want to take over or carry forward into the way we brought up our children. I don't know how you feel about your parents trying to get them to relive their lives in you.
Sorry, Simon.
Oh,
do you want to-
yes.
And then I'll
Yeah,
go
okay,
to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have children, so I'm just probing around the glistening ideals of ideas. I don't know what it takes, the reality, but from the other end of the spectrum, being a child to someone and experiencing that and observing that in others and seeing that, I'd say it's definitely a prominent, relatively unconscious occurrence that happens, and it makes sense. Like you mentioned at the start, everyone wants the best for their kids, and sometimes, to see them live what you know that you could have done or should have done, and I'd imagine that'd be quite fulfilling.
Yeah, I guess so, especially from the parents' point of view. Maybe I'm not sure from a child, but I could understand that perspective. Caroline, what do you think?
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but with the Armenians, in our culture, we had the genocide in 1915. So there's been a lot of trauma in that, in the Armenian history and with the Armenian people. And I feel like my parents' generation and the generation before them, I know my parents were brought up in kind of quite, and to be honest, kind of an abusive, kind of controlling environment. And they had a lot of trauma as children themselves, because they had parents that were children of victims of war, or genocide. So that kind of passes down from generation to generation. So the truth of the matter is, I have not really taken much from my parents at all. Actually, my experience as a child, I kind of thank them because they showed me how not to be. So very much, as a child, I was given no emotional support at all because that just didn't exist in my family. My parents didn't know how to do that. And everything with my parents was money. So, you know, if you're upset, whatever, here's some chocolate. Here's something, you know, it was like a pseudo need that they were, it wasn't an actual, a child needs love and emotional support. So I made a decision when I had my children that I would do the opposite to my parents, that I would provide them with love, positive words and affirmations, and emotional support. I was put down and called, you know, always, you know, something negative came out of my mum or dad's mouth pretty much constantly because it's just who they were and how they were. And I do not do that to my children. I put effort into actually sitting down, like at night time before my daughter goes to bed, I'll sit down and have a good half-hour chat with her about how her day's going. Like just providing all that love and support and care that I never got as a child. So the only thing I do take from my parents though is that importance around education and you know, working hard to succeed and to, I think they're good values to have. And I kind of do instill that in my children, but I don't put pressure on them to like be the best. I just say do the best that you can. And
Thanks, Caroline. I mean, that's really comprehensive in terms of what you've taken on board and what you've not, in fact, actually. That's quite an interesting perspective. Now, Molly, I mean, quite interested, given that you were brought up almost through three sets of parents. What do you feel, I mean, going forward, you think you'll take on board, and what would you definitely not take on? The same question.
I think one of the point I would take when the kids say no, actually is not a real no. So as a parent, for example, when I was little, I was full of fear, of course, to a lot of new things. Like I used to prefer to stay at home, but my parents encouraged me to go out. First they take me out for traveling, and then later on they encourage me to go like a large family gathering, like 70 people, you know, a lot of people. That environment. Also later stage as a teenager, they started taking me to some professional work dinners to see how they communicate with others. But initially I wasn't trying to engage or even don't want to go at all. But they took me out, and then turned out, because it repeated a few times, I don't fear anymore. So that's the one thing I want to take forward from my parents is when the kids say no to you, you actually can find a way to see whether they are willing to do it. Maybe this moment they say no, but next moment they change the idea. Yeah, maybe I can go. So it's a different way of communicating to your kids to get the results. You want your kids to grow. And I had the idea, yes, it is unavoidable. Every parent, they actually have their expectation on their children. As a children, we are like a black sheet of paper, and they can put anything on those paper. But after like certain years, and you got influenced by community, by friends, and by society, you're gonna have your free will. So the parents actually can change their style, and to allow more room and the time for the kids to think themselves and get to know what is the purpose of their life, what they want to do, or what they are good at. So make them to do the decision at in the later stage. But initially, it's like a plant. You water them, take care of them, extra care, and later on let them grow. They become a tree themselves. Yeah.
Sounds really interesting. I just want to cover a point that Caroline actually raised in terms of the background and the influences of the genocide in Armenia. In terms of other events that are happening even now, how do you think that would influence your parenting style? And Simon, I just want to get your opinion. We have the COVID pandemic that's just happened, or is happening still at the moment. Social media and all the issues potentially. How do you think that could potentially influence your parenting style?
It's an interesting thought. once again, that's all it really is. It's just a thought and idea. But I think one thing for me that's changed a lot, that stands out since I was young, is technology and how prominent and prevalent it is with younger people, and especially when they're in a very transitional and not fragile state, very impressionable. So I think one of the big factors would probably be more technology that would shape the way my own style, rather than say the pandemic or these other global things. And in terms of how to tackle it or to be influenced by it, I'm not too sure as of yet. I'm excited to see. Yeah.
Sounds like there's a lot of excitement ahead for both of you. Paul, in terms of these external factors and things that are happening to us at the moment, do you feel that that's changed your parenting style at all? Do you think you could have done anything different, let's say? Or?
So the advancement of technologies and the advancement of issues, global issues around the world, is going to happen regardless of whether we want them to or not, right? So the one thing that I sort of have embraced and adopted is to sort of roll with the punches, go with the flow. I think earlier on somebody made a statement about being a dinosaur. I suppose specifically around the technology, I don't want to be that dinosaur, so I want to, no disrespect to that, I want to, I think, keep on top of it and at least maintain some sort of relatable experience with my kids and not fall behind. I see it with my own dad at the moment, who basically doesn't have that grasp of technology, and even to get a telephone call with him, because he's overseas, is difficult because he can no longer, even use a phone to operate FaceTime, or it's just a foreign concept to him. Internet, what's internet, right? And I think in that way, I would like to stay up to date and move with the times, and then incorporate those new aspects into my parenting style, so that I, again, maintain some sort of some relativity, so to speak.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. And then the last question I have, culture. We have a representation here of multiculturalism. It's what we live with. Do you think culture is still something that you bring into parenting, like it was done many years ago? Is that still important, or no longer as important? Anyone that wants to contribute?
I'm going to speak on my daughter's behalf, who complains as follows. I have a Portuguese father, an Italian mother. I was born in South Africa. I've lived most of my life in Australia. Who am I? So I think culture is relevant, but at some point in time, it's no longer relevant, because in this globalized society, I think you need to identify with who you are and who you feel like you are, and no longer let culture sort of determine your actions and your decisions and the way that you want to live your life.
Thanks, Paul.
I have an opinion on this culture. I believe the culture, of course, influence the parenting style, because if I think about my culture, I'm basic typical Chinese culture, which is believe in moderation and golden mean, anything excess, which is not good. And when I try to deal with things, I always think in different perspective and always like opposite. For example, if I think in the future my kid is super smart, I will be paying more attention to him, because he's not average, which means he's gonna have a different experience from the majority of the kids. So it's highly probable he will be an isolated one. So I will pay more attention to it, because of culture influence me. Anything extreme, I need to pay more attention. I believe the culture do influence my parenting style. I have an example is my husband, and he actually grew up here. It's like a Western culture influenced his mind. But when I ask him in depth, he actually is a typical Confucius, that type of mindset, which is always when I talk something good, and then he's gonna talk something which is, you can see there always disadvantage on this fact, right? When I see, I don't like this or doing something, and he's like, look, there are always good part of it. It's always like two sides.
It's like Chris saying that.
Yeah, on the same fact. So that's a typical like Chinese culture, which is moderation, and it exists in everybody. So I believe the culture do influence parenting style.
Sounds like it, especially in so it comes very across. Caroline or Simon, anything you want to add in terms of culture and how you feel, how does that influence your parenting?
I feel like growing up, I grew up in the Armenian culture was quite prevalent. I grew up with a massive extended family. Our Christmases, the birthdays, they were huge. And, we did have quite a lot of fun during those times. There were good times. And I would say, unfortunately, with the way things are today, like because of, I guess, the technology and because I just feel like it's not the same anymore. And I kind of feel kind of sad for my children that I can't give them those experiences that I had as a child because I don't have that massive, people are so, because of technology, because of the way the world is now, we're so disconnected and it's just not how it was before, which is quite sad. So, yeah.
Thanks, Caroline. Simon, anything you want to add?
Just to briefly touch on what Paul said, I think we're at a time where we're exposed to so many different cultures now, and it's becoming this big blend where maybe back in the day it was a bit more singular. If you were raised in this household, it was this culture, and I feel personally now I see value in each of the different cultures, and I like to think that I'd be able to take the good things from each one and just, like Paul said, make my own subjective, individual sort of style out of that, rather than being limited to you have to do things this way, tradition demands this is what our ancestors did. It's now it's a bit more free range.
Blended,
I think it's
Thank you so much. I just wanted to open up to the audience if there is a question. Jürgen?
So many questions you could ask. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you all for your contributions. It's interesting to see the variety here, but there's one thing that you all have in common. You are here because of your parents, and you need to be grateful to them. So when is the last time that you went to them and you thanked them from the heart for something that they've done for you? What was it and when was it?
For me, it happens to the Mother's Day recently. I sent a big bunch of lilies to my mom because recently I got some issues myself, and I talked to her and she actually helped me. So my mom always led by example, like what is unconditional love, because I know how many troubles I bring to her and my father. But at that moment this year, I'm 30 plus already, but it's the first time I really, really appreciate my mom endure a lot of troubles. I actually give it to them, but I never understood them. And the first time I have a big, the heart, which is, my mom have a high temper. She's a tiger woman, kind of. But first time, I told myself, no matter what my mom did to me, I appreciate she bring to me and endure what I bring to her. So I should always appreciate her. So it's Chinese culture, we don't express love, that often. But it's the first time I told Mom, I love you, and Dad, thank you for helping me for all these years. And finally, I grow up. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks so much, Molly. I'm afraid we're out of time, so we're not able to ask any more questions from the audience. But I'm sure that you agree with me that there's been some really good discussion and some insights that we had not thought of before that have come from this panel of experts. And just to touch on a few, parenting styles, your own parents and how that has influenced your style. In some instances, as we could see from Caroline, there were definitely some things she wouldn't take forward. But from Molly, she acknowledges that she understands now after so many years some of what her mother, for example, how she went back and spoke to her and was grateful for something with a bit more understanding. From a cultural perspective, we've really seen two perspectives. Molly feels it's still important to take the culture forward, but there seems to be another theme of this blend of cultures, of not only having one culture, but rather appreciating all. So I really want to thank these wonderful panelists, and I appreciate you being so candid and open and insightful. I've definitely learned a lot from this discussion, and I certainly hope the audience has. So I want us to all give them a hand of applause. Thank you for participating in this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for having
you.
us.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Hand over back to Aaron, the tabletop master. Thank you.